In 1859, Teresa Bagioli Sickles became the centre of one of America's most shocking scandals. She had been having an affair with Philip Barton Key II, and when her husband, Daniel Sickles, discovered the truth, he gunned down her lover in broad daylight. Philip was a notable figure, and his public murder sparked a sensational trial that captivated the nation and would change legal history forever. Teresa Bagioli was born in New York City in 1836, though the precise day and month is unknown. Her father was Giuseppe Antonio Bagioli, a wealthy Italian-born composer and opera director. He was the head of an Italian opera company that visited New York in 1832. While he was there, he met the famed librettist turned music teacher Lorenzo da Ponte. As he began socializing with the da Ponte family more, he became acquainted with Maria, likely Lorenzo's adopted daughter, though some sources claim that she was the result of an extramarital affair. At this time, Giuseppe was in his mid-30s, while Maria was barely a teenager. Despite this, a relationship was allowed to go on, and they most likely married in 1834, when Maria was just 15 years old. Teresa was born 2 years later. Teresa would grow up in deeply musical and cosmopolitan surroundings, spending much of her youth in the home of her grandfather, Lorenzo da Ponte, who had famously worked with Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart decades earlier. Surrounded by artists, languages, and ideas, she was described as highly intelligent, and by her teenage years Teresa spoke multiple languages and played several musical instruments with ease. But this cultured, carefully nurtured world would not protect her for long, because as we shall soon see, she would catch the attention of a man whose name would make her infamous. In the early 1850s, as Teresa entered her teenage years, she was already being noted for her striking beauty and growing charm. Then in 1851, she met Daniel Sickles, but this wasn't actually their first meeting. Daniel was born on October 20th, 1819, and was the son of a New York lawyer and local politician. Daniel had also become a lawyer, though in the late 1830s and early 1840s, he worked in the city's publishing industry. This brought him into contact with cultural figures like Lorenzo da Ponte and Antonio Bagioli, who had some of their musical annotations published. He was also friendly with da Ponte's son, a New York-based professor. Despite his later success, in his early 20s his parents thought he was unsettled and in need of guidance, and was reportedly placed in the scholarly household of Lorenzo da Ponte, where he studied French and Italian. He is said to have lived there for about a year in the late 1830s, when he was about 20 years of age, and Teresa was still an infant. As mentioned, they were reacquainted years later in 1851, and by then Daniel had established himself as a local politician in the New York Assembly. Daniel quickly became enamored with young Teresa and soon proposed. But even with his social standing and long association with her family, the Bagiolis initially refused to give their consent. Undeterred, Daniel went ahead and married Teresa in a civil ceremony on September 17, 1852, and the union was later formally recognized in a religious ceremony after her family gave their approval. It's not entirely clear what the exact age difference was between them. Daniel is generally understood to have been born in 1819, though he later claimed 1825, likely to minimize the noticeable age gap between himself and his young wife. If we accept the earlier date, he was just shy of his 33rd birthday, while Teresa is widely believed to have been about 16 years old at the time they wed, a marriage that would soon unravel in scandal. Daniel and Teresa's marriage started fairly conventionally. Teresa gave birth to a daughter whom they named Laura Buchanan in the late spring of 1853. It's hard to determine whether or not they suspected Teresa was pregnant when they married the previous September, though in all likelihood, they had been planning to marry anyway. As such, it was not a shotgun wedding, so to speak. Beyond this initial appearance of marital normality, the marriage was troubled from the very start. Daniel was a known womanizer when he married Teresa in 1852, and rumours swirled around his actions. He had once been censored by the New York Assembly for keeping company with a known prostitute and bringing her into the assembly chambers. The speculation was added to by the fact that he was frequently away from home. For instance, Shortly after Laura was born, Daniel headed overseas as part of a trade legation to Britain on behalf of the government of President Franklin Pierce. He had brought the same prostitute from New York, Fanny White, with him to England, and even introduced her to Queen Victoria in London. After he returned home, he was elected to the US House of Representatives in 1856, taking his seat the following year. It was now that Daniel and Theresa moved to Washington, D.C., settling near Lafayette Square at the heart of political life. There, Theresa quickly became a standout figure in elite society, renowned for her beauty, charm, and skills as a hostess, even earning the nickname Queen of Washington Society. Together they appeared the perfect couple, but behind the scenes, Daniel's repeated affairs told a different story. Then in March 1857, during President James Buchanan's inauguration, Theresa met a tall, dashing man named Philip Barton Key II. Philip was the son of Francis Scott Key. Francis was a well-known American poet and lawyer. His greatest claim to fame was writing the poem entitled The Defense of Fort McHenry, a rousing nationalist work that was written about the defense of Fort McHenry in Baltimore, Maryland, by the Americans against the British during the War of 1812. We all know the poem today, even if very few of us have ever heard it called by this name. It was subsequently put to a tune, and is known today as the Star-Spangled Banner. In Washington, Philip and Theresa moved in the same social circles, and they frequently saw each other at gatherings and events, where they gradually grew closer. With Daniel often absent on political business, Theresa regularly attended these events on her own, but Philip was never far from her side. Still very young and increasingly isolated, she appears to have grown disillusioned with her marriage. By the spring of 1858, by which time the Sickles had been living in Washington for about a year, her friendship with Philip turned into an affair. Philip was a prominent figure in Washington, who served as the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. He was born in 1818 and was 18 years older than Theresa, who by then was around 22. Philip was also a widower with 4 children, and was widely regarded as one of the most handsome men in the city. The affair between Philip and Theresa went on for the better part of a year, largely hidden from public view. Yet, despite their efforts at secrecy, Philip's growing attachment became difficult to disguise. Well, he was often seen lingering near her home, or appearing wherever she might be. The two met frequently, sometimes in the street or in her carriage, and eventually arranged more private encounters. Philip even rented a small house just minutes from the Sickles' residence, where the pair could meet in secret. As he passed Theresa's home, Philip would signal with a wave of his handkerchief, and if Theresa responded in kind, they would meet at the house. But it was this very signal that would ultimately lead to his undoing. Despite their attempts to keep the relationship secret, Daniel was informed via an anonymous letter that he received on the 24th of February 1859 that his wife was engaged in an affair. Enraged, Daniel confronted Theresa. She initially denied the affair, but under pressure, she broke down and gave a detailed written confession describing her meetings with Philip. In the aftermath, he forced her to promise she would never see him again. We do not know exactly who sent the letter to Daniel, but the affair between Theresa and Philip was apparently common knowledge among the staff of the Sickles' house, so it could have been someone who had simply seen Philip coming and going. What we do know for certain is that Philip Barton Key II was murdered just 3 days later on the 27th of February 1859 at Lafayette Square in Washington, D.C. Lafayette Square is known as President's Park today. On that day, Daniel Sickles saw Philip Key outside his home in the square and believed that he was waving his handkerchief, signalling Theresa to come out. Philip had been anxious as he hadn't heard from Theresa for several days and had rented a room at the Cosmos Club, which was on the opposite side of Lafayette Square, directly across from the Sickles residence. Regrettably for Philip, he was unaware that the affair had been discovered, and as he waited in the square, exposed and unsuspecting, Daniel armed himself with several pistols and prepared to confront him. According to a close eyewitness to the events, and the attorney Samuel F. Butterworth, when he saw Philip outside, Daniel burst outside and approached Philip. He then shouted, "You scoundrel! You have dishonoured my house. You must die." Philip retorted, What for?" Then Daniel pulled out a gun and fired at Philip. The first shot grazed Philip's hand, following which a scuffle occurred. The pair wrestled with each other, during which Daniel Sickles managed to fire off another shot, which hit Philip below the groin. Wounded, Philip staggered away and tried to hide behind a nearby tree. As he did, he shouted, "Murder! Don't kill me!" However, Daniel was indeed intent on killing him, and he moved closer and fired 2 further shots from point-blank range. One of these misfired, but the other hit Philip square in the chest, causing a fatal wound. Daniel fled, while Philip was dragged into a nearby house, where he died shortly afterward. Later that day, Daniel was arrested after taking refuge in the home of Attorney General Jeremiah S. Black, but he would not be held in the conditions one might expect. Daniel Sickles' arrest caused a sensation in Washington. Though he was detained in a notoriously grim, rat-infested prison, his own circumstances were far from ordinary. He was granted unusual comforts, including meals from home and a heated room, and received a steady stream of visitors, from family to prominent figures in Washington society. As he sat in custody, newspapers across the country seized on the story, laying out the scandal in extensive detail. When the trial came to court on the 4th of April, a huge crowd showed up outside. Sickles was a wealthy enough man by the end of the 1850s, and he had hired a crack team of 8 lawyers to represent him, led by James Brady, a New York-based lawyer who was known for having witnesses intimidated. Conversely, the prosecution was led by Robert Ould, an attorney of limited ability. Sickles was a popular politician, and as the jury was being selected, it was estimated that 72 out of the 75 individuals considered for jury duty could potentially be sympathetic to the defendant. When the trial commenced, the defense laid out their case in an unusual way. They claimed that Sickles could not be held accountable for his actions because he was temporarily out of his mind because of Philip Key's affair with his wife. As one of Daniel's lawyers, John Graham, put it, "If he was in a state of white heat, was that too great a state of passion for a man to be in who saw before him the hardened, the unrelenting seducer of his wife?" As this temporary insanity argument developed, a bizarre situation evolved where the murdered Key almost became the man on trial in the court, while Sickles was portrayed as the victim. The defense sought to reinforce their case by introducing her written confession of the affair as evidence, hoping to further justify Daniel's actions. The prosecution pushed back, and the document was ultimately ruled inadmissible. Undeterred, Sickles took matters into his own hands, leaking the confession to the press, where it was published in full, exposing Theresa's private life and intensifying the frenzy surrounding the case. Another major moment came when a doctor appeared on the stand and testified that Daniel's psychological collapse, as a result of the revelations about Theresa's infidelity, had been so great that he had been concerned that Daniel would never recover from the insanity that caused him to kill Philip Key. Teresa was slandered and vilified in the press on a daily basis as the trial went on, and she avoided being seen in public. When the deliberations in court ended on the 26th of April, the judge instructed the jury that they should bear in mind that 3 days passed between when Daniel learned of Theresa's affair on the 24th of February and when he killed Philip on the 27th. He was clearly highlighting the weaknesses in the idea that the murder was a crime of passion. Daniel had 3 days to calm down. The fact that he murdered Philip at the end of those 3 days suggested premeditated murder. The jury decided differently. After just 1 hour, the jury returned and declared that Sickles' temporary insanity plea was legitimate. They found him not guilty. That evening, Daniel threw a huge party in Washington, attended by 1,500 people to celebrate his release. The aftermath of the trial was perhaps as strange as the events leading up to and during it. Theresa and Daniel were briefly estranged from each other, but they didn't divorce. Theresa was vehemently attacked in the press and was shunned by high society on the East Coast, whereas Daniel resumed his place in Congress. All of this makes a person wonder if people really understood who the murderer was. In the end, the couple did reconcile somewhat, a decision which led to further outrage in the papers. Then their sensational story became yesterday's news. Abraham Lincoln was elected as President of the United States in November 1860, South Carolina became the first state to secede from the Union a month later, and the American Civil War broke out in April 1861, as the Confederate States of America began trying to expel Union forces from the South. Thus, the trial of 1859 disappeared from the public consciousness. In any event, Daniel Sickles now had the opportunity to rehabilitate his reputation. He became an officer in the Union Army and fought at many of the most important battles in the war. In early July 1863, he was involved in the Battle of Gettysburg. During the clash, his right leg was mangled by a cannonball. The leg was amputated and was sent to the Army Medical Museum in Washington. The bones are still on display in the National Museum of Health and Medicine to this day. Theresa's marriage was never the same after the scandal, and she largely withdrew from public life. She spent much of her remaining years in New York, where she died in Brooklyn on the 5th of February 1867 from tuberculosis. She was just 30 or 31 years of age. Despite the scandal years earlier, her funeral in Greenwich Village was well attended on account of her family's connections. In 1869, Daniel was appointed as US Minister to Spain, and some rumours claim that he even had an affair with the exiled Queen Isabella II. In Madrid, he then began a relationship with a Spanish-French woman named Carmina, and they married in 1871. The couple had 2 children together. After returning home in 1880, he held many offices in New York, and even briefly returned to Congress for a 2-year term between 1893 and 1895. By this time, his daughter with Theresa had died. The two had grown estranged, and Laura, who was an alcoholic, died in 1890 at just 38 years old. Daniel Sickles would live a long life, dying at 94 years of age in 1914. In a final telling detail, he remains the only senior commander from the Battle of Gettysburg without a statue, an absence that reflects the shadow cast by the scandal, the trial, and the killing that defined his legacy. Thank you so much everyone for watching this story on Teresa Bagioli Sickles. I hope you found it interesting. Let me know what you thought of life down below in the comments, and if you want more content like this, also let me know down below in the comments. I hope you guys are subscribed and have notifications turned on to get all my videos as soon as I upload them. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.